Could you imagine being a kid and someone's like, tell your parents?
Well, here's something really fun about the myth of Der Grossmann, right? So to make it even creepier, there are apparently documented cases involving children that went disappearing around the time that the story was being widely circulated in the 16th century. So that being said, though, I don't know if those cases came to light after the story was already being circulated, or maybe the story was circulated because of the disappearances. Both make sense. With all this in mind, I would like to go back to the whole werewolf thing that I mentioned earlier.
Yes, please, yes, please.
So there's a legend about a farmer who lived in one of the small villages in the Black Forest. His sheep were apparently going missing and turning up dead, and it was naturally assumed that wolves were to blame for it.
Yeah.
It makes perfect sense. Yeah. Especially given the wildlife.
Correct.
The farmer, according to the story, stayed up all night this one evening, and he kept watch over the sheep so that if he saw any wolves going to attack them, he could do something about it. When he spotted a wolf that he believed to be the culprit, the farmer shot at it and hit the wolf, but the wolf did not fall.
Right.
It ran injured back into the Black Forest. The next day, another man in the village lay bleeding in his bed due to a gunshot wound.
But there was nothing for the man that had stayed up, correct? I had heard, I didn't think it was associated with the Black Forest, but there's a fable the man had set up and he had found the wolf, shot at the wolf, hit the wolf. He had died sitting in his chair because something had accosted him through his windows and they couldn't find the actual source, but he was mauled.
This story that I found was kind of a blip on the radar in the article that I was reading about the Black Forest. It encompassed a lot of different stories surrounding it. I'd also now like to mention something really interesting about the Brothers Grimm tale of Little Red Riding Hood, which, by the way, is set in the Black Forest. So in the original tale, the word that was used was not wolf, but rather werulf, which is a 1,500-year-old word that translates to the modern-day word of werewolf.
Right, like werewolf, their wolf, their wolf, their castle.
Doing my research about all this, because the Brothers Grimm come up a whole lot, I found out that the Brothers Grimm never actually wrote a story, rather than they just wrote them down.
Right.
What the Brothers Grimm actually did was they went around the different small villages in the Black Forest and they collected folklore and tales from people that had lived there, and they collected the things that they believed were real. So all of those Brothers Grimm tales were legends that people believed were really happening and existing within the Black Forest and around their communities. They were never meant to be fiction. They were really cultural researchers. That was what they were doing.
Right. And obviously those have turned to Disney movies and such.
Yes.
Did I tell you my model from last weekend? He and I were talking, and...
Wait, Kyle?
He and I got in a conversation, and he was like, well, how come people don't see ghosts from before the 16th century? And I was like, a lot of times they're listed as folklore and or some series of will-o'-the-wisps. In our modern-day folklore, obviously white ladies are top of the pops.
Yeah, a lot of that is how you look at it, too, and how you categorize folklore.
Right.
A lot of the other stories that surround the woods involve witchcraft. Necromancy, especially, is a big thing in the woods, and a lot of restless spirits. One of the things that I read, there was actually a book called The Necromancer that was written some 20 years before the Brothers Grimm ever started actually going through the Black Forest and talking to different communities.
Right.
So the Brothers Grimm were still basically children's living in their mother's house at this point. And this book, The Necromancer, was apparently written by an unknown author, and it talks about a great necromancer that lives in the Black Forest that is raising the dead and is commanding evil spirits to incite violence within the different villages, causing villagers to kill each other.
Okay.
Which apparently, before the book was written, was a thing. There was a lot of violence throughout the villages and people were killing each other. So perhaps the book was inspired by that. It's interesting because we don't know who wrote it. So maybe somebody has a little bit of insight about it. It's all about the mystery. What do we know? And another one of the things that I was reading about it, apparently there's this whole story about like a monastery. There are these monks that lived there, and because there are so many like angry and restless spirits that are said to live in the Black Forest, what these monks would do is they would go out and they would collect these restless spirits and they would put them in these burlap sacks, basically these old sacks, and that's how they would capture the spirits, and they would take them to a top of a mountain and they would throw the sacks over into the lake.
Okay.
They basically wanted to cleanse the area because there was so much bad juju going on, and they thought that by capturing these spirits and containing them and then by throwing them into the lake, it was going to cleanse the woods and also free the spirits.
That's really nice.
It is really nice. As much bad stuff happens, I guess a bunch of good stuff happens too.
Right.
Germans will tell you, they're like, oh yeah, the Black Forest, it's a great place to go take a hike. A lot of visitors to the woods also say that they feel like the woods have an energy and a personality all of their own.
Which would make sense because they have their own ecosystem.
Don't you feel like it has an energy of its own? It has its own personality.
Right.
There's something different about it. I would like to visit. All the pictures that I see of it are very beautiful, and I would like to go be in a fun fairy tale forest with a headless horseman, a spooky tall man that chases children.
I want to know where
ghosts.
the headless horseman came from.
I do too. I want to know where the headless horseman came from as well. And that was the Black Forest.
It was so good.
And I hope you enjoyed it. And
I
I hope
did.
that I beguiled you with it like you did with this beer that's in front of me that I'm putting in my face hole right now. It's like the quintessential fairy tale forest.
Totally agreed. During your story, I remembered that some of the buildings that she had stayed in, Miss Tillie, especially the one that she had kept the coffin in, are now considered cursed by a lot of the occupants. And
I love a good curse.
a lot of the occupants above where they assume that it's cursed have gotten to the point where they have heard too many people screaming in the lower apartments. It happens. Sometimes you're mad at the person you're around, but a lot of what they continuously say is, I'm going to kill you. I'll poison your food. And this is in the apartment that has taken the place of the basement where she kept the coffin for Frank.
Okay, wait,
The
so people don't
residents.
hear the voices? People actually say these things?
Apparently. But it's always that apartment, and it could be the best couple you've ever seen.
That's a bad time.
Well,
That's not a great time.
no kidding. What I've learned recently is oftentimes the clink of the glass. The reason that a lot of people do toast, if they're superstitious, is to ward off evil spirits. May you live as long as you like and have all you like as long as you live.
Oh, clank.
You can cheers with us on our email.
shotsinthedarkpodcast at gmail.com. We're also on Instagram, which we're really kind of super active on Instagram. And we're Shots in the Dark Podcast.
On Twitter and Snapchat, we are Shots in the Dark P. If you like us, please rate us.
And if you're using an Apple product, please rate and review us on iTunes. It's super helpful. We love it.
And if you're a Google user like myself, please review us on that as well.
And from both of us here at Shots in the Dark Podcast, we hope we've left you shaken.
Not stirred.
Bye.
Bye.